Good morning, everyone. We will get started actually in just a few minutes. We are missing one of our guests, so we will get started in about 2 to 3 minutes. So thank you, everyone. All right, and good morning. Thank you again, everyone, for joining our virtual caregiver dementia program. My name is Sarah Murphy, and I am the Vice President for Programs and Services with the Alzheimer's Association Greater Pennsylvania chapter. And I'm excited to be here with you all today. We are representing the Alzheimer's Association, but we are doing this in partnership with AARP Pennsylvania and with the Pennsylvania Association of Area Agencies on Aging. We would not be able to do this program without our amazing partners and our wonderful committee. Some of our committee members are joining us today that really took the opportunity to today provide a really fantastic program on really important topics. So I'm here today to just do a little bit of housekeeping items. The chat feature will be available for information purposes. All of the engagement activities will take place on the Q&A portion that you will see at the top right corner of your screen. We will address questions during the Q&A time for each session that we have. And we're very fortunate today that we do have 2 sessions that are facilitated by fantastic panelists. The first one will be on caregiving, and the other one will be on really important topics and resources in the afternoon session. We will have a break portion as well, so we have a chance to have some light refreshments at your leisure. Without further ado, I'm going to get started, and I'm going to introduce one of our partners here today, Brenda Apple. She is our project manager for the Pennsylvania Association of Area Agencies on Aging, and she will take on this program and be introducing our Secretary of Aging. So Brenda, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. Can somebody make Secretary Kovulich a panelist? I was unable to. So good morning. As Sarah mentioned, my name is Brenda Apple. I'm the project manager for the Pennsylvania Association of Area Agencies on Aging. Caregiving, obviously we know caregiving is a very demanding job, and we are thankful that you are able to take some time to join us today for the valuable information being presented during today's symposium. I am pleased to introduce the Secretary of the Pennsylvania Department of Aging, Jason Kovulich, who will be kicking off our event with some opening remarks. Secretary Kovulich has over 24 years of experience within the human services field, and most recently from 2016 until being appointed secretary was the director of the Lackawanna County Area Agency on Aging. So without further ado, Secretary Kovulich.
Good morning, everyone. How are you? I just wanted to say I'm excited to see partners working so well together. It's really how we will move the needle. It's really how we will continue to get things done in Pennsylvania, and it really shows that on a national level what it means to be working in the older adult space in Pennsylvania. It's about partnership, it's about being focused on missions, and it's about getting things done collaboratively. This is a wonderful day of presentations that you have set for you. I'm excited to see what will come of it. Again, this is space that's very important to the Department of Aging and our partners. And caregivers have to be elevated in our mind, and we have to continue to focus the light on caregivers and all the work that caregivers do that oftentimes doesn't get recognized enough out there, to make sure people understand what it means to be a caregiver and what it means to have the stress of being a caregiver, and also to make sure that we're programming to provide relief to those caregivers and make sure that we still continue to provide the correct kind of supports to the care recipients. I'm excited by all of the work that is being done here today. I'm excited to continue to get to work with all of you and our partners in the Department of Health and our our partners in the Department of Human Services as we continue to work with caregivers and people who are afflicted in these spaces. So I won't belabor my introduction too much. I just want to make sure I tell everybody that I appreciate all of you and I appreciate the work that you're doing. And the Department of Aging is here to support all of you and to continue to support our partners in making sure that we accomplished all the missions that we've set out to do, and that we work together to make sure that as we develop our master plan for older adults, that the work that is being done here today is also incorporated in the vision of the future. So with that, I will turn it back over. And again, thank you for having me. And I appreciate all the work that is being done here. And I hope everyone has a great holiday season.
Thank you, Secretary. We appreciate you being a part of our program this morning, and welcome to your new role, and appreciate all that you are doing on behalf of the Commonwealth. Really, we think about caregiving. We are here today either because we've been impacted, we know someone, or we are here because in the community we know we can do more, right, to address the needs of those impacted by Alzheimer's or other dementia. So thank you so much for joining us. And I am going to turn it back now over to Brenda. As I had mentioned earlier, we could not do this program without our fantastic partnerships, and partnerships really can be powerful. And we are joined today by a couple of representatives from the partnerships that put the program together. And I'm going to turn it back over now to Brenda for some words on behalf of the P4A, Pennsylvania Association for Area Agencies on Aging. We love our acronyms. So Brenda.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, that's a mouthful. So that's why we tend to use P4A, because it's a little bit easier than saying the full name. But anyway, on behalf of P4A and the 52 area agencies on aging in Pennsylvania, we are happy to be partnering with the Alzheimer's Association and AARP Pennsylvania to offer this virtual caregiver symposium. We hope that you find it valuable as you continue to provide care to your loved ones, friends, and neighbors with dementia, and I hope you enjoy the program.
Good morning. My name is Bill Johnston Walsh. I'm the State Director for AARP Pennsylvania. On behalf of our 1.8 million members, thank you. Thank you for taking time out of your busy day to participate in this virtual caregiving symposium. When we began planning for today with our partners at the Alzheimer's Association and the Pennsylvania Association of Area Agencies on Aging, it was with the voices of Pennsylvanians living with dementia and their family caregivers who fueled our efforts to deliver to you a session that will allow us the opportunity to speak with you, listen to you, and learn from each other. We know there's no one-size-fits-all solution when it comes to dementia. Each person or family needs to decide what works best for them in their own unique journey. We are so happy you joined us today and look forward to providing you with relevant information, resources, and support so you are successful every step of the way. Thank you for all that you do for your loved ones on a daily basis. Enjoy the symposium.
Yep, first one to not unmute fast enough. My name is Teresa Osborne. I am the State Advocacy Director with AARP Pennsylvania. It is my pleasure to be here with all of you today. I'm also honored to introduce our first panel and, importantly, our panel facilitator, Amy Goyer. Amy Goyer is AARP's National Family and Caregiver Expert and moderator for our Family Caregivers Discussion Group on Facebook. Amy has more than 35 years of professional experience serving and advocating for older adults, children and family, and people with disabilities. She has been a family caregiver her entire adult life. She writes extensively about her experiences caring for her mom and her dad who lived with Alzheimer's 12 years before his death. Thank you, Amy, for moderating today's panel, and I will turn the microphone over to you.
Thank you, Teresa. Good morning, everyone. And thank you, AARP Pennsylvania, for bringing me here today. I'm really honored to be a part of this discussion. As you heard, this is an issue that's near and dear to my heart on a very personal level as well as a professional level. My grandmother also had Alzheimer's, and I helped care for her as well as my dad. So I'm familiar with all of the challenges and all of the joys. I want to thank all of you for being here. We are going to have some truly incredible people on our panel today. I'm honored to be able to facilitate this discussion. You'll be able to ask them questions towards the end of the session. So feel free to post your questions in the chat or wherever the Q&A. I'm not sure how you guys want them to be doing it, but we will get to you at the end of the session. So I want to introduce our panelists and ask each of them to say a few words about their situations. First, we have Pam Haas. Pam, are you on the screen? Looking, there she is.
I am.
She's a lifelong resident of Lehigh Valley, and she was the primary caregiver for her husband, who had younger onset Alzheimer's, and he passed at the age of 59. Pam has been a very active volunteer for the Alzheimer's Association. I was reading all about the things that Pam does. She has worked for on the Walk to End Alzheimer's. She does advocacy work. She's worked on The Longest Day, and she serves as a community educator. Pam, you have shared with us that many of your husband's family members also have had younger onset Alzheimer's, and that your 42-year-old daughter also has the same gene mutation that the rest of his family have, and she's starting to experience some mild cognitive impairment. Can you please tell us about your caregiving experiences and how they've affected you?
Well, my father-in-law was the first one in the family that got a diagnosis. We think possibly his father had it also, but at that time they did not know what dementia was. But my father-in-law, as I said, was the first one to be diagnosed. He was diagnosed at the age of 50 and passed at 56. Following him was his sister, who was in a different state. So I wasn't around her very much, but she too died in her early 60s from Alzheimer's. And then the third person in the family was my husband. When he was diagnosed, he went to see a neurologist down at the University of Pennsylvania. And there he was offered the opportunity to have genetic testing done, since 2 family members had already passed. And indeed, they found that he had a genetic mutation on his 14th chromosome called PSEN1. So we continued to doctor down there. My husband lived for 8 years with the Alzheimer's and passed away, as you said, at the age of 59. Since his passing, 2 of his cousins happened to be the 2 children of the aunt that had it. They have passed also, late 50s, early 60s. And as I said, currently we have 3 people in the family. 2 of them are my age. I'm 67. One is a cousin, one is my brother-in-law, and then the third one is my daughter. Now, my daughter had herself tested genetically because she was concerned. She thought she was seeing some things in herself. My son chooses not to know at this time unless there is a cure. So everybody is different, and I tell them that's their choice to make, and I support them in whatever they do. My daughter is experiencing the mild cognitive impairment. Unfortunately for me, she does live in another state, but I just saw her at Thanksgiving, and the things she's starting to have trouble with are making appointments. She remembers them the day before, she remembers them that morning, but by the afternoon when she should be at the doctor's appointment, she receives a phone call that she forgot her appointment, things of that sort right now. So it is a hard journey for anybody. I feel very passionate about this cause. That's why I do as much as I do for the Alzheimer's Association now that I'm somewhat finished with my journey. I won't be my daughter's main caregiver like I was for my husband. But anyone that's listening that is a caregiver, my heart goes out to you. And I'm sure that this morning's symposium will be a great help for you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing, Pam. I know that being a caregiver for 8 years for your husband at such a young age must have been really quite a challenge.
It was, because we still were working. We had our own business. So that was quite challenging then.
Yeah, well, we'll dive a little bit more into your story and your experiences. I want to go ahead and introduce our next panelist, Mario Brown. Mario is a born and bred Pittsburgher He is the inaugural Associate Dean for Equity, Engagement, and Justice in the School of Pharmacy at the University of Pittsburgh. And he holds a BS in Biology and a BS in Medical Technology from Salem International University and an MPH from the University of Pittsburgh Graduate School of Public Health, and is currently pursuing his Doctor of Education in Administrative and Policy Studies at Pitt's School of Education. So Mario clearly brings a wealth of professional experience in the medical and the health field, along with his very personal role as a caregiver for his mother who has Alzheimer's. Mario, you are a very busy man. Can you tell us a little about your caregiving experience with your mother and the effect it's had on you?
Thanks so much, Amy. And yeah, I feel as though that bio is pretty not important because I don't know, my journey with caregiving with mom, really started maybe 5 years ago, I would say, and it really started as a result of her saying that she was beginning to have some memory loss, and by chance she met a friend of mine who actually works for the University of Pittsburgh's ADRC, Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. And as my mother does, she's very proud of her son. So she always brings my name up thinking that everybody will know me. Well, it just so happens that this lady did know me. And she asked my mom if she would like to enroll in a research study. And the research study required mom to have a partner. And so my mother called me, told me she had met the lady and asked if I would be her partner. And as a part of that intake process, she was diagnosed with early cognitive decline. And since then, we have progressed through early on stage dementia. And just this year, she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease and has been progressing. And so personally, I've been through this once before, but not at this level. My father had dementia. Never really diagnosed. We just sort of watched him fade. His father had it, and my sister and I cared for him until his passing. But I never became educated on it. My father was strange for me. He didn't raise me. My mother was my hero. She was a nurse. When I thought about what I wanted to do in life when I was in college, sort of floundering around, she came to mind. And at that time, I really couldn't see myself being a nurse. So I went into medical technology because I still got to play in blood and stuff like that and wear a white lab coat, right? But my mother was always my hero. And to see her go through this, it has been a challenge for me. I had to go through a lot of acceptance. Thank goodness that I'm not going through it alone. She has a husband. And my sister and I really try to support him as he is the primary caregiver that he lives with her. But even today, I will be going with him and my mother to look at some more day programming that we can possibly get her in. So it has been a difficult process because it's been hard to watch the decline and to watch my mother go through periods of trying to accept what's happening. That, as we all know, that's not easy to deal with. So yeah, that's sort of a thumbnail of my story.
Yeah, there's so much. None of us can tell our story in 5 minutes, right? There's just so much to it. And I know that like I've worked in the field of aging my whole career, but when you're caring for family members, it's a whole different level, right? And you do bring, I'm sure, a wealth of pharmacy and other knowledge, but when it comes down to it, it's a very emotional journey, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. And Amy, I will say too that one of the things that I really try to do is be an advocate for mom. One of her big pet peeves was that we do have a lot of caregiver symposiums, education, which is really needed. I mean, I've learned so much in terms of how to cope with my own stress, but really how to deal in a compassionate way with mom. But one of the things that she would always say every opportunity that she gets is that there are so many opportunities for caregivers, but there's nothing really out there for people with dementias and Alzheimer's disease in terms of support groups. So I've sort of been her advocate, and I always try to carry that message that they want support as well. And they want to be around people like themselves because, quite frankly, they think we don't understand, is what mom tells me, and I believe her. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, you make such a good point. And I think that's one of the reasons that today our next panelist, who I'm going to introduce, is actually someone who's living with Alzheimer's, and she can give us her perspective. So I want to introduce Victoria Bale next. Vicki, can you come on the screen and say hello and make sure you're here? I think you're on. There you are. Hi. So Victoria brings a different perspective to our panel. She was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's disease at age 46, and she's a leading community speaker on Alzheimer's disease and dementia in the Edinburgh area. Vicki, I admire you so much because you, despite your diagnosis, you remain very positive and dedicated to enjoying life, and you're living it to the fullest. Your perspective is so valuable. I thank you for talking about it. Can you tell us a bit about your experience with Alzheimer's and the effect it's had on your life, and also the role that your support team plays in supporting you through this journey?
You might have to re-ask me some questions because
No problem.
with my brain being as it is, it's not always great, and it hasn't been this week specifically. So
Okay, there are ups
good
and
morning,
downs.
everyone.
We understand that, believe me.
My name is Victoria. I go by Vicky. I live in northwestern Pennsylvania with my husband. We have 3 adult children, and all 3 are in college right now. So we're semi-empty nesting, dealing with college drama and getting ready for everyone to come home for the Christmas break. So my house will be very full and very loud and very active again. I have no family history of this disease, and I'm 48 now. I was diagnosed at 46. So between 42, 43, 45-ish, I started having some forgetfulness happen. I've lived in the town of Edinburgh, northwestern Pennsylvania, for over 20 years. And one day I got lost driving through town, and it only was a few moments, but things kind of progressed from there. And I had a doctor tell me there was nothing wrong with me. I did not take an answer for that. And I am very lucky to have a neurologist that lives down the road from me with a different healthcare system that knew me and pursued to get my diagnosis, pursued all the testing needed done. Huge shock to the family. It has been very, very hard on my children and my husband. They worry constantly. I have chosen to really change my attitude to finding joy in every day and trying to find positivity in things, because we really are what our focus is on. If we focus on how hard life is and how difficult things are, it weighs down on us. So with me focusing on the positive, trying to find joy and speaking on that, I speak publicly. I have no idea where I get my public speaking gene from, probably my dad, but I have no fear of it. So that's been my platform, and that's where I've tried to spread my outlook and positivity.
So wonderful. And it's interesting that you talk about joy, because I found as a caregiver, and I was caring for both my parents and my sister at the same time. My mom had a stroke and my sister had Cushing's disease. That joy was my greatest survival skill, that I had to learn to focus on, create moments of joy and notice those moments of joy, because the moments are really what we have.
Truly.
And so it's really nice to hear from your perspective that that's important too. I really found that, especially for my dad, that, that's really what it was all about, right?
Yep.
So, and I'm sure, as you say, you mentioned your children and your husband and the strain on them. We have a lot of younger caregivers in the world, and they don't always get the attention sometimes, and how it affects them. And they're off in college, but I know when they're home, like you said, they're worrying about you, they're thinking about you, being in touch, supportive. And so we'll delve into some more of your journey in a little bit with some more questions. I want to kind of move into, and thank you to you, Vicki, to Pam, to Mario, all of you for sharing a little bit about your experiences. What I'd like to do is start by discussing how you take care of yourselves, all three of you in this, in your various situations, which are all different. And Pam, you can think back when you were caring for your husband. I know that when I was caring for my parents and my sister, I was overwhelmed, a lot of the time. And one day I drove to the gas station and I was almost out of gas, that feeling. And I finally made it. I didn't break down and I filled the car with gas. And as I pulled out, I went, oh, it's interesting how the car runs better on a full tank of gas. Well, duh, but that was my aha moment, that I was expecting myself to run on empty all the time and be just as efficient and be just as cheerful and get everything done. And I realized that I had to keep filling my tank, just like my car. I had to keep taking care of myself on a daily basis. I like the oxygen mask analogy. You've heard that, put the oxygen mask on yourself before you put it on others. But that to me is when the plane's going down and it's crisis, and caregiving is every day. This is a marathon. So I started thinking about ways to fill up my tank really quickly and to do premium fill-ups that were a little bit more, and the routine maintenance and tune-ups when I wasn't caring for anyone. That system worked for me. And I found that it made sense for my parents too. So as Vicki explained, I really focus on having moments of joy for them as well as for myself, because it filled all of us up. So I want to ask you, what works for you? How do you go about self-care? Victoria, why don't you start? What is your perspective on self-care as you're living with Alzheimer's?
Stress gets me. And I used to love my job before I had to leave. It was very high stress. I loved 100 things at a time, multitasking and all that. That's where I thrived. That was my environment. And now I'm like, whoa, one thing at a time, and let's write them down so I can check them off. So lists make my life work. If I know I have things going on, I write them down and I put them on a notebook on my kitchen counter. Also, my calendar on my cell phone. We all have our cell phones with us. I put things on my calendar. Some days I'll have weeks where there's nothing, and some days I'll have things where there's 10 things on there. And not only do I put a note on what it is, in that note, what time it starts. And I set a reminder 15 minutes before it starts so that it actually goes off and tells me what it's for. Like today, I knew I had an Alzheimer's symposium and I had a panel and I had to be signed on, dressed from the waist up, of course, appropriately by a certain time. And I even followed up with Sarah Murphy. I said, please text me too. Like I am almost always, I have enough presence of mind where I can ask people to remind me. And I'm still setting my own reminders and writing my own notes.
Wonderful. And I think, that being organized is a big piece of it. And I think whether you're a care recipient or a caregiver, that can be incredibly helpful. I remember my dad had a pocket calendar. He didn't have a smartphone, but he had a calendar in his pocket at all times and had everything written in there, mom's stuff, his stuff, everything. And I think that can be extremely helpful. And like you, I have, as a caregiver, I keep a calendar and have different colors for everybody's appointments and all of that. So I think that's a really good perspective on staying organized. Mario, how do you take care of yourself when you're working and caregiving? And 60% of family caregivers are working while they're caregiving. And that's, there's a lot of things you're being pulled in a lot of directions.
Yeah, yeah. Absolutely right, Amy. And I'm sitting here just thinking about it right now, even today, having to really be strategic about how I divide up my time and divide up my day. My job is relatively demanding. I'm being pulled in many directions. So I was just sitting here listening to Victoria and thinking about, on my best day, it's high intensity and very stressful because we have so many intersecting things going on at the same time. I think the best thing that I've been able to do is realize that I don't have to take on the whole burden by myself. And so this team approach that my sister and Mr. Steve, my mom's husband, we have sort of grappled with our roles. We've screamed and hollered at one another. And now we've sort of settled into a place where we're figuring out who does what. So when I come and I speak on things like this, it's because Mr. Steve and my sister tell me that I'm the spokesperson. So I carry the message for the team, right? I also sort of take primary care for medical appointments and things like that. So we have different roles that we do, and I think that allows each of us to have a little bit of respite. And the other thing is that I think that we're all learning how to be honest and truthful about what we're going through, what our day is like, how we're feeling with one another, so that we can be sensitive to each other's needs, and we intentionally try to give each other breaks. And then thirdly, I think that being honest about what's going on within our family, with all of us, with my coworkers, with my own family. Like I said, I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a grandfather. My wife has a large family. There are needs there. And so I think communication is really important. And then I do a lot of, I'm a spiritual guy. I do a lot of prayer. I just try to center myself so that I can just get through a day without freaking out sometimes. But keeping it simple and understanding too that whatever I'm feeling and going through, I think compassion is really important, because whatever I'm going through on any given day, I think about my mother and what she might be going through, and it makes my problem seem very small. So then I go back into, well, what can I do to help? What can I do to support? And it might just be simply picking up the phone, letting her hear my voice, and then she'll tell me that, of course, Vicki, I don't know if you do this or not, but Mom, she'll tell me she hadn't talked to me in such a long time. And of course, it was just maybe a couple hours ago or maybe yesterday. And I'm learning so much, because I'm learning it's all about the feelings. It's not about the facts. And that wherever Mom is at, that's where we are, and we roll from there. We roll with it from there. And that actually begins to give me joy now, whereas before it used to really stress me out. I was even very angry at one point. And I can feel that starting to go away as we all just sort of settle into our roles as we go through this journey together.
Mm-hmm. So many good points, and take your perspective is a big part of it, of taking care of yourself, and as you say, not moving away from the anger and into the embracing. Okay, this is my moment, and the current moment with Mom is what's the most important thing, and that really feeds your soul, as well as eases your emotions and everything else, it sounds like.
Yes, it does. Yeah. Staying in the moment is really important.
It's so important. I think that's, mindfulness. It's what we all do to try and, I used to feel like if I was thinking about work while I was taking care of Mom or Dad, I was missing the time with Mom and Dad, and I wasn't really solving the work problems, and vice versa. So really being focused in what I was doing at the time was really helpful. So Pam, how about you? How do you take care of yourself? How did you take care of yourself when you were caring for your husband?
I like to think of it as the signs you see up there that say faith, family, and friends. I relied on faith, family, and friends. And it's something you cannot or should not even try to attempt to take care of the person by yourself. It's not good for you, and it's not good for the individual with the dementia. So when it came to faith, of course, as Mario had said, you pray. And I actually reached out to members of my church. There was one gal who was a part-time nurse, and bless her, she would call me on a day off, and she had her own family and farm to take care of, but she'd call and say, I have off 2 days this week. She'd say like maybe one Monday and Wednesday. And which one is better for you, for me to come over and stay with your husband while you go and run an errand or have, just some relaxation. And that was a blessing. And then when my husband was in his late stages, the doctors wanted me to have 24/7 assistance in the house. And I reached out to another gal from my church who had been a retired nurse and asked if she'd be willing to take a shift. And she said, not only will I take a shift, but I'll take the night shift. She said, I always work the night shift. I'm used to staying up all night long. And that was a real blessing, because that enabled me to have time to go upstairs to my own bed and sleep, knowing there's someone there who was going to take care of my husband and my home, and there was no worries there. My family, as I said, my daughter lives in another state, so unfortunately for her, she wasn't able to help as much. I know she wanted to. But again, we had a farm to run, so it was a pick your own fruit farm. So we always had a lot of hustle and bustle going on, people in and out. And so some days when it was super busy and I couldn't give him enough attention, he would get agitated. And I would call upon a friend of his, as well as my brother and sister-in-law. And my brother and sister-in-law would pick him up and take him to their house, where I knew he was in good care. And both my husband and my brother were great sports enthusiasts. So they would simply put some sports on TV on that weekend, and everything would be fine. And I could relax and concentrate on keeping our farm going successfully, and knowing he was in good care. And then another friend of his I called upon very often when I had appointments, whether it be for hair or whatever, doctor's appointments. And he was really awesome with my husband. He actually not only came to him, but he would take him out and give him joyful moments. He would take him out for lunch, or one time he took him to a bar just to sit and have a drink. And there was a nearby lake. He'd take them there so they could just watch the boats together. And there was one time when I called that I was home now, they could come back. And my husband was having such a good time. He told his buddy he didn't want to go home. So that was all a blessing. So, but again, it's a journey that no one can or should really take by themselves. I know of people who try, but I think everyone needs to have that break, just to keep that patience and kindness and staying calm with that individual. You need a break now and then.
And so you've talked about, building your team, and especially so you could work at your farm. What about your doctor's appointments and all of the things that you needed to do to take care of yourself?
As I said, I oftentimes would call upon his friend who was retired, and he would take care of him. Or I tried to, eventually I did have more assistance in the home when for instance, like when he was on hospice, and I would try to schedule things around when I knew someone would be in the house for his care. But I also found out, to be very truthful, that when he had passed and I made doctor's appointments for checkups, my doctor would say to me, we haven't seen you for a long time. And it hadn't even occurred to me that I wasn't keeping up with that particular aspect. Fortunately, I'm a healthy person. So, I often said to the people in my support group who were older people, the advantage of having someone when you're younger is that I have the stamina to, take care of him and do what I need to. I have no health problems. And, for someone, they would say, oh, it's so sad, he's so young. And yes, indeed, and that's very, very true. But like I said, in my perspective, I was able to take care of him at home because I felt I was younger and had that stamina. But I did use some adult daycare as well at some points, particularly when our farm was busy. I would pick him up and another gentleman from our support group and take them to adult daycare for half a day, just, to make sure everything was in place and got everything done I needed to get done. And then I'd bring him home after lunch and spend the rest of the day with him. So it all worked out, but you do, like you said, you need a team.
Need a team, right? And you need to, it's interesting that you say you just completely lost track that you weren't going to those checkups and preventive appointments. And that's so key, because we all know that if we don't take care of ourselves, we're not going to be there for the other people in our lives. And yet, doing it is a whole nother ball game, right? So it's
Absolutely.
important to do those things. Yeah. And sleep. What about sleep? How do you sleep, Vicki? Are you having any sleep disturbances at this point in your journey?
Interestingly enough, I am. I love my sleep. Love my sleep. And I am one that I will go up early, I'll read a book. That's another story. I can't really read books as much as I used to. So basically my bedtime stories are the Harry Potter novels. I've been reading them for the past 10 years. It's just nighttime reading. But anyway.
Good. Yeah, that's perfect.
The past 2 weeks for me, and not to make it seem so small, but there have been some really big stressful things that have happened. And I can tell how my Alzheimer's is affecting me handling stress, because I've been a disaster, straight up disaster. I'm speaking pretty well with you all today, but there are days where I don't speak so well. And the past few weeks, see, I'm already losing my train of thought, but
That's right.
my sleep has also been messed up, and that me not sleeping through the night or having trouble falling asleep and not staying asleep, I will take a nap because I need my rest. And then that kind of feeds the cycle of, okay, well, you napped so long, instead of waking up when I set the alarm on my cell phone, I sleep for 3 hours and then I'm not able to fall asleep. So not sleeping well at night leads to not functioning well during the day, leads to, it's kind of the cycle.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And sleep is just so key. And does that affect how your husband sleeps?
No, actually, my husband and I don't always sleep in the same room.
Right. Sometimes that just is easier.
So he is a retired state police trooper, and he worked midnights and all over the place. And so life's been chaotic for us. And we just find that we go in phases. So,
yeah. And I'm sure when you have not had a good night's sleep, and therefore your functioning is a little harder the next day, that affects him and how he interacts with you and how the support that you need from him.
He sees it. And of course the 3 college kids, specifically, I have girl, boy, girl, super tight with my girls. Boy, I might talk to him once every 2 weeks if he needs money or something like that. But the girls call and text me multiple times a day, and they pick up on it, and they don't often say much. They used to, but they'll pick up on things. And, I might overhear a conversation with my husband. Mom's having a rough day. Yeah, she is. Stuff like that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, what about you, Pam and Mario, in terms, the reason I focus on sleep is that I think it's the first thing that we sacrifice. There's too much to do, so we sleep less hours, but then that makes our health deteriorate and makes us not be able to function as well the next day. So Pam, what did you do to make sure you got enough sleep when you were caregiving?
It's amazing because my husband is gone 10 years now, and I forgot all that, all the bad stuff, which is kind of nice.
Yeah.
But one day a memory came up in my phone, and it was about how I hadn't slept the whole night, that he was up all night long. And I guess I just slept when he could sleep during the day. I was fortunate enough, in the wintertime in particular, when the farm wasn't as busy, he would have been, but not my position there.
Mhm.
And I would just try to sleep when he slept. And otherwise, you just do what you have to do. And
Yeah.
just, but like you say, it does take its toll on you. And being patient and being kind and not losing your temper is very difficult when you haven't been getting the proper amount of sleep.
Right. And that's why it's got to be a priority for both care recipients and people who are providing care. You know, I used to have a motion sensor in the hallway outside my dad's room, a camera in the room. And, you know, so on the next to my bed, I could wake up and see if he was turning over or if he was getting out of bed. And if he got out in the hallway, then that would alert me. You know, I had to have multiple things in place for me to be able to really feel safe enough that if he needed me, I would wake up before I could really get good deep sleep. Mario, how about you? You know, again, you're juggling so much. Your mom's not living with you, but you are playing multiple roles. How about sleep for you? Is that an issue yet?
Yeah, well, sometimes. As it relates to mom, you know, I think when she is having a hard time sleeping, I'm one of the people that she'll pick up the phone and call, probably the primary person. She and Mr. Steve, they sleep in separate rooms. And he has some health issues. I know he has to wear CPAP at night. You know, and sometimes he'll tell us that, yeah, mom had a rough night. I heard her up doing things. And right now, you know, the little apartment that they're in, mom isn't at a risk of leaving out the apartment or anything like that at this point. But when she's having a hard, rough night, sometimes she will call me either very early in the morning or late at night. And I will get up and talk to her. Now, what I usually have to do is try to get up out the bed and leave the room so I don't disturb my wife. But she usually wants to know, okay, what's going on? How are things going? And I tell you, not only am I learning how to have patience with myself and with mom, but also having patience with my wife at times as well, because sometimes you don't want someone asking you a bunch of questions, right? Especially if your sleep's been interrupted. So trying not to be irritable with other people in my circle, I think is something that's a challenge sometimes. But yeah, I think the one word for me, and I think Pam really summed it up when she said faith, family, and friends. But if there's one word that I think I really am learning to implement and practice, it's patience. It's just so important. And even being patient with myself, because if I don't get the proper amount of sleep, I don't, you know, I'm 62 years old myself, you know, so if I don't get the proper amount of sleep, I don't function very well. And so I have to give myself grace also and realize, you know, maybe you need to look at your calendar and see what meeting can you reschedule. What else can you do different to try to take care of yourself in the moment, so that you don't, you know, lose it or something like that.
Yeah,
so
yeah. It's really, it is a dilemma. You know, AARP has a family caregivers discussion group on Facebook that I moderate. I invite all of you to join us. We have about 17,000 caregivers in this group. And one of the caregivers posted yesterday that she's like, you know, what do I give up? I'm so exhausted. I want to go to bed, but I know if I don't clean up the house now and get everything ready for the morning routine, then the morning routine is going to be harder. And that really resonated with me because, you know, sometimes you're trying to do things and, you know, if you don't do it, you're going to make things more difficult later, but it's going to be, you've got to get sleep, you know. And the other thing, you know, that you brought up, Mario, is stress and stress management. And I wanted to ask you, Vicki, you know, you've mentioned that a calm environment is really important to you and your functioning. Can you say a little bit more about that? And how keeping a calm environment is important?
Extremely. Again, used to love that motivation and deadlines and stuff like that. But now my brain can't process a whole bunch of things at one time. So if there are multiple things that need done or on the agenda or whatever, it doesn't even matter. I look to lists. I like to make my lists and check things off. I like to have sticky notes and little reminders, and I'm still fully aware enough that I can cross things off, and again, utilizing my planner. But when I get in the situations where I get overwhelmed or stressed out, and that's such a broad statement of how I feel, I shut down. I either go up to my room and take a nap, or I will put a show on, something probably that I've already watched, so I don't have to focus on it too much. And my other go-to is word search puzzles. That is like because they already give me the words and I just have to go through and find them a little bit. Like that is, I have a book and a pencil that are with me all the time. Like that is something that it takes my focus off everything else around me. So I just have those little ways of coping with things.
Yeah, and that helps you kind of focus and turn off all the other extraneous stuff going on.
Turning off the other stuff is huge. Yes. Yes.
That's so important. And thank you for sharing that perspective. I think those of us as caregivers often don't quite understand the extent to which that is really a factor, and that, you know, a lot of environmental chaos is too much for the people that we're caring for, where, you know, we may think it's good to have all these things going on and it may just be overwhelming. And I think for us as caregivers too, I mean, Pam, what would you say, you know, that did you have to, you seem like a person who's very grounded and very calm. Actually, both you and Mario do. And, you know, was that important for you to manage your stress, to kind of keep things calm and in the home environment?
In the home environment, yes. And for those caregivers who are listening, please don't be hard on yourself when you do have moments where you lose your patience, because I know I did on occasion. I know I went to my support group one time and told them how I had lost my temper and I felt so bad. And they said, "You're only human." And again, that's where you need to reach out and get help. You shouldn't try to do it all on your own. And that's how you cope. And yes, calm is very, very important. At one point, my husband had become aggressive. This was toward the latter part of his journey. And I talked to the hospice nurse. I called her. She came over, helped me calm him down. And she said, we really should put him in the hospital and find what we can do for him to keep him calm. And I said, must I? And she said, this is totally your call. And I said, it was a Friday. And I said, well, let me give it through the weekend and see how things go. So I did exactly what you're saying. I turned off the television for no distractions. I put on very calm music. I didn't go anywhere. He didn't go anywhere. My daughter-in-law, God bless her, brought us food, put it on the porch table. You know, I would take the time to bring that in. Nobody, I had to let people know not to call. And if there were calls, I just ignored them. And it went well for the weekend, but it was because of the stage he was in. He became aggressive again by that next Monday, and I did have to hospitalize him for about a month and a half, just to find what was needed so that he wouldn't hurt himself or me or anyone else for that matter. So calm is very, very important.
Very important. And I think, you know, Vicki, one of the things, your perspective on this, you know, my dad would lose his temper or lose his patience because he didn't quite understand what was supposed to be doing. You know, it was when he would become upset, it was generally because he was overwhelmed, didn't know what he was supposed to be doing, didn't understand the confusion. And so we have to forgive ourselves as caregivers when we lose our cool, and as care recipients, right? And have compassion for each other. And I would just hug dad and say, yeah, it's a rough time right now. We're in this together. I think he always responded to that. I want to ask you about finances. So caregiving and an Alzheimer's journey is a long journey. It can be really difficult financially. And for me, I ended up actually in bankruptcy after caring for multiple people, but long Alzheimer's journey, lots of extenuating circumstances. And I share that because a lot of caregivers do struggle financially and don't talk about it. And I decided I was going to be open about it because it's really common, that sometimes there are financial struggles. How has caregiving affected your mom financially, Mario, your family, what's your perspective on the financial aspects?
Yeah. Mom has a home. And my sister and I, we fluctuated back and forth with what to do with the home. And we still are, we thought about putting it up for sale. And right now, Mom has a tenant in the house, and it actually provides her with a little bit of, not much, maybe a couple $100, but a little bit of supplemental income on top of, her Social Security. So that helps a little bit. And her husband recently just retired this year. So he's now on a fixed income. Mm-hmm. And so we all just try to pitch in and make sure that whatever needs to be done, it gets done. So the upkeep of the house, I've sort of taken that on as Mom's oldest child. And I don't bother Mr. Steve with that too much at all. So, I would say that as of right now, there isn't a big financial burden. We all just sort of share the load and we do what needs to be done at the moment. With him retiring, there has been a little bit of restructuring. He was paying all the bills in their household, but now Mom contributes to that. And my sister, she is a banker. So she actually helps budget. She takes care of all of Mom's banking needs and financial needs. That is very helpful. So this team approach that we have, the more that I talk about it and think about it, it does work. It's working. And I think we're blessed in that way to be able to do that. Some days it doesn't feel like a blessing, but.
Oh, I'm sure. Do you have any paid caregivers on your team at this point?
We don't. We have been looking at that because it's beginning to feel as though that might be helpful at this point. So we're still trying to really see, how we can best do that. Should that be maybe one of Mom's family members that comes to sit with her sometimes, one of her cousins? Who should that be and how do we go about it? So that's one thing that we're all still doing, is learning how to navigate the system. And that's why being a part of platforms such as this, listening to Vicki, listening to Pam, meeting you, being a part of the Alzheimer's Association, and I'm looking at the chat and different resources that are being populated there. It's very helpful because navigating the waters can be stressful and difficult sometimes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So Vicki, from your perspective, you're not working, I assume, at this point, and I'm sure that's had a financial impact on how you had planned for your future. How are you managing that?
So I was working full time up until the end of July, and summertime is when I really noticed that I was having a lot of trouble keeping up with work, home, all the things. Mm-hmm. I planned a big event, planned and implemented a really big event in June for my position that I was at, and nailed it. I mean, it was perfect. And I poured everything that I had into that, and I quite literally never recovered from it. And I noticed me kind of going downhill after that. So it was the end of July where I sat down, talked to my husband a little bit, and I talked to my boss, and I said, I need to step away for a little bit. I said, I have not been okay since June, and I need to step away and see if I can come back. So I went on short-term disability, and it didn't help. So I transitioned from short-term to long-term. So we took a pay cut because it's not meant to, completely pay what my salary was. And then when short-term ran out, there was nothing there for a little while. So, things have definitely been really, really tight. My long-term has just been approved and is starting to kick in. And then with my employer paying me long-term disability, they will work with me on applying for Social Security disability at the age of 48. So there's that then. But it's been tight. My husband handles all of the finances. And that we kind of did it mutually or me for the most part for a while and then together. And now I've just turned everything over for him because I forget I do things.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
it's a hard thing, part of managing it. Yeah.
Yep.
Pam, how about you? Did you take a financial hit in terms of your caregiving
Well,
years?
we were actually in a very different situation than most people. And I do want to add to what Vicki said about applying for Social Security disability. We waited a very long time before we did that. And it was kind of a pride thing, I guess. And when I did finally apply for it for my husband, the gentleman said that he could retroactive 1 year back, but why did I wait so long? And, in hindsight, that was a big mistake. So anybody out there, there's a word of advice. Don't be afraid to apply for that Social Security disability when you can't work anymore. But in my case, I worked free for my husband on the farm. So, but he took a salary and that's what we lived on. So at the point in time when he could no longer work, which was only 2 years after his diagnosis, I went and took the legal steps of transferring the presidency of our corporation to myself and taking on his salary so that we could continue to live the way we had been. Otherwise, I don't know what we would have done.
And you were able to keep the farm going.
Exactly. Of course, one of the first things we did was get an attorney. We did a power of attorney for each other. I'm the one, of course, that ended up using it, but it was nice to do it both ways. It just made you feel more comfortable. And a will, we updated our will to make sure we covered everything we needed to, and the lawyer was just to make sure all those legal things were in place that we wouldn't lose our farm or our properties. So that was all very important, and I advise doing that very early on so that the person with the illness can help in that planning and express their desires.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that was very helpful to our family was veterans benefits. My dad was a veteran of World War II and the Korean War, and we ended up getting some financial assistance from the VA. That was really critical, as well as some other, money saving things like home health aides and incontinence supplies and medications and things. So also, if you're watching, even if your loved one has not been taken advantage of any veterans benefits ever before, be sure and apply for those and get that done. I also waited too long on that, Pam, and I wish I had done it sooner. Well, we're about to wrap up, and I just want to ask each of you if you have one last bit of advice for folks. Vicki, you want to start?
Yes, and it's perfect timing because I put my hand up there because I just thought of something while we were talking about all of this.
Yeah.
So I worked in the insurance industry before I left my job. Oftentimes with Alzheimer's, we're talking later in life things. A huge thing that I have learned, I went at age 39 and got myself a life insurance policy. I had this little crisis. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be 40. What's going to happen? Not knowing quite literally what happened. For those looking for genetic testing and all those things, you might be disqualified from a life insurance policy because of what they show. So that's something that awareness needs to be spread on that. Be cautious. Live your best and healthiest life, whether you get tested or not. We haven't discussed it with our kids, but I've straight out told my kids, don't do anything because you need to look to your future. I have a life insurance policy on myself. My husband's was through his job, mine was not. That's something that really needs to be looked at before testing happens, before testing for the disease or even genetic testing. It's just something really to consider, and I don't think people do until it's too late. So that was why I had my hand up.
That's really, really
Perfect timing.
helpful point. Really
Yes.
good one. A good piece of advice that I hadn't even really thought that much about.
Yep.
How about you, Mario? One last piece of advice?
Yeah, thank you. I think just patience. For me, I think it's continuous learning. Yeah, continuous learning. Always, and I think the best teacher is mom. She teaches me something every day. And what I have to do is sort of calm myself, be present in the moment, and be open to learning whatever lesson it is that she's given me. Because although she has a progressive disease, mom is she's still mom. And until she isn't anymore, that's how I will continue to try to approach it. So it really requires me, Mario, to humble myself and try to be the best son that I can be to her. And so that would be my parting words is, yeah, for
Lifelong
me,
learners.
it's all about love, so I try to lead with love.
Oh, that right there says it. Lead with love. I always think about things either come from fear or love. Let's all try and operate from the standpoint of love. I often caught myself with that as well. Pam, one last piece of advice.
Sure. One thing I would say is to, as Mario said, to educate yourself. Read as many books as you can find, and particularly on the type of dementia your loved one might have. And one book that was recommended to me by the neurologist, which I found the most helpful, was The 36-Hour Day. I highly, highly recommend that book to anyone who either has dementia or has a loved one with dementia, because you learn an awful lot through that book. I also advise joining a support group. That was the other thing the neurologist said. He encouraged us to join a support group. There are support groups through the Alzheimer's Association, which is what I did, but I know a lot of nursing home facilities and such also have support groups. And Mario had mentioned your loved one needs support too. I don't know if the Alzheimer's Association still does it this way, but this was pre-pandemic. You could take your loved one with you to the meeting, and they took your loved ones in the other room and just did fun things with them and making it a joyful evening while you were getting your education. And just that learning plus getting tips from each other as caregivers was so very, very helpful. Another thing I regret that I didn't do was to record any changes I saw in my loved one, as well as doctor's appointments, what kind of testing happened, comparing it to the appointment before that. I regret that I haven't done that, because there are things with my daughter now that I think, did this happen with my husband at this point in time? And if I would have those notes, I would be able to compare and maybe help her more, or foresee what she's going to need sooner, and that sort of thing. So I would highly recommend, again, writing down any changes you see in your loved one, dating your dates to the doctor, and what tests were run, did they do, as well as the last appointment, or are they declining, that sort of thing. Plus the notes you have from your symptoms, you can take along to the doctor to help him as well. And the final thing I would say would be to remember that when your loved one has an inappropriate behavior or is agitated or aggressive, just remember that it's the person's disease that's acting out. They aren't happy having the disease. They certainly would change it if they could, but they just have no control. So just remember it's the disease and not the person that you love. And no matter what stage your loved one is in, just always remember, even if they can't express kindness and love to you, they always can feel it when they're receiving it. So always try to show kindness and love. And as Victoria had said, finding some joy in every day. So that would be my advice.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. I want to add one tip, and that is to use music. I have a degree in music therapy, and so I use music all day long to motivate my dad, to calm him down, to get him to walk in, better and everything. So explore using music and connect with other caregivers. Please join us. Let's keep the conversation going in the Family Caregivers discussion group on Facebook that AARP hosts, that I'm the moderator for. I've got some links, some AARP resources. We have a financial workbook for caregivers, all kinds of great things at aarp.org/caregiving. And I can't seem to put things in the chat, Teresa, that are for everyone. I've only chatting with the host and panelists. So I'm going to send you some links maybe you can share later today. Do we have any questions? Any time for a couple questions?
No, we are up on our time, and you guys, Vicky, Pam, Mario, and of course, Amy for moderating. You guys were just amazing. We can go on, I know, another 60 minutes and learn so much and be inspired, and really just express our gratitude for you all joining us today and sharing your journeys with us. We're going to take a 10-minute break, but Amy, yes, we will get those resources out to folks, no worries. And go stretch your legs, grab a cup of coffee. And again, panelists, 1,000 thank yous. Okay, see you in 10.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. Hope you had a few minutes to stretch and get a cup of coffee or whatever you needed to do. So I am pleased to introduce our facilitator for our expert panel discussion, Matthew Trott. Matt is the director of the Erie Agency on Aging in GCAC, which is the Greater Erie Community Action Committee. See, that's another mouthful too. There's our acronyms again. Matt is the director since 2015, and prior to that, he was the deputy director for 10 years. Matt is a 1993 graduate from Penn State University and also serves on several boards and committees throughout the state and his area. So thank you, Matt. And I'll let you add any additional information and before we jump into the panel discussion, so you can take it away. Thanks.
Thank you, Brenda. And that first panel was just amazing. So for those that have stayed on to listen, thank you very much. I learned a lot of things in that first thing. As Brenda said, I'm the director of the Erie Agency on Aging at GCAC, Community Action Agency up in Erie County, Pennsylvania. And in that 25 years that I've been here with the agency, I've spent a lot of time with identifying community needs and planning care responses and coordinating care networks and providers. And I can tell you that currently the times we're in right now are some of the most challenging that we've ever had for providing care for individuals, especially those with diagnosis of Alzheimer's and other related dementias. So the key thing I want to share right now is you need to be forewarned, because then you're forearmed. And preparedness is something that I think we all need to focus on. And I think our panelists for this afternoon session really highlight some of those ways you can prepare yourself. No one expects to have or have to deal with a cognitive decline, but we have to be prepared for that. And I want everyone on the call to know one thing: you're not alone. Whether you're a caregiver, whether you're diagnosed with Alzheimer's or other related dementias, or you're just starting to have some memory issues, realize you're not alone. There's caregivers, there's support professionals and networks out there dedicated to helping you. Many of them are the sponsors of this call today. So realize that please reach out to those networks and individuals and whatever care or support you need, whether they're legal, whether they're medical, whether they're mental health, whether they're caregiving issues, whether it's the financial costs of care, all those things. There are plenty of resources out there, especially in Pennsylvania, but across the country to help with those care needs. The second thing I wanted to highlight was that there's, you have to contact someone you trust, no matter who it is. In those areas of legal, medical, or caregiving, you have to make sure you have somebody that you trust to get your information from, as well as your services from. And always, the older adult has choice in who provides their care. That's another thing that's difficult in these challenging times, to make sure that individuals have the choice of who provides their care. With that background of trust and choice, I really want to introduce our three esteemed panelists. And I'll start off with Attorney Robert Slusky from Slusky Elder Law. And I'll let him introduce his background. And if he could give us a few minutes of what are the key legal aspects that those dealing with Alzheimer's and other related dementias need to be concerned about. So, Attorney Slusky, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, Matt, and everyone else. So a little bit about me. I've been practicing law for 31 years. Almost entirely of that 31 years, I've been practicing elder law, which is a sort of, well, I always call it estate planning on steroids, because while we deal with the basic things like wills and powers of attorney and trusts, as an elder law attorney, we also deal with the issues that typically come with aging and or being a disabled adult individual, where we're helping people try to, while I'm not a social worker, any good elder law attorney is probably at least a third social worker, because we're dealing with very touchy-feely human issues, and as well as coming up with a care plan. Even though I don't do care planning per se, part of my job is to assess the needs and the preferences of the family and try to give them options for what works from a care perspective and how to pay for it. My office, I am based out of suburban Philadelphia, so I serve the southeastern region of the state. My main office is in Montgomery County, and but I also serve Delaware, Philadelphia, Bucks, and Chester because I have offices almost all of those places. In addition to the basic elder law, estate planning, Medicaid, guardianships, estate work, those are the things that an elder law attorney does. What I think kind of gives me a different and unique perspective is that for the last 25 years, I have been the solicitor for the Montgomery County Office of Senior Services, used to be called Aging and Adult Services. So I have a lot of experience in dealing with the wonderful people who work there, but also it's a different type of practice because I'm not just worried about financial. I'm not just worried about Medicaid. I'm not just worried about nursing home. What I'm worried about is the big picture, and I get to see the big picture a little bit more clearly when I'm dealing with my older adult protective services cases. So they kind of guide me in. I'm going to give you 5 very quick points, knowing that I have a relatively limited space of time here. I'm going to give you 5 very quick points that if people want to flesh out later when we have the open question time, without, of course, crowding out my other presenters, I'm going to give you these, and hopefully there'll be some food for thought. First, one of the things that I do a lot more now than I did 15 years ago is what we call pre-planning. This is when a family comes to me early in the process. They just got a diagnosis. The person is probably still largely functional, largely independent, but there has been a recognition that there is some impairment and it's not going in the right direction. So the first thing that I always say is get to an elder law attorney at that point if you have the luxury of doing that. Because at that point, you can still make sure that your basic documents are in place. And for me, the really, really key documents when I'm talking about that are powers of attorney. Yes, wills, trusts, they all matter, but powers of attorney are your advocacy documents while you're alive. So I want to make sure that I have a really well-drafted and comprehensive financial power of attorney that the client can understand. Because what I see often in my practice is people come to me with powers of attorney that they got off the internet or from an attorney who didn't do this type of work, and there are restrictions and limitations, and now the person is not in a condition where they can understand and execute a new one. So we're stuck with what we have, which sometimes forces us to use the guardianship process, which is far less preferable than having a well-drafted POA. So have your financial POA and your medical, your healthcare directive, healthcare power of attorney updated at that point. Make sure that they say what you want, that they are very broad, very comprehensive, that they do what you might need them to do when you are unable to communicate your wishes. Second thing, when it comes to the healthcare power of attorney, don't make assumptions. Have a conversation with your agent or advocate while you're still able to do so, as far as what you want, as far as the type of care you're going to get later, the type of end-of-life planning that you might want. These are all relevant things, but it's best not to guess, do not assume. Number 3, probably in addition to the pre-planning aspect of my practice, one of the things that I'm doing so much more of today than I did 15 years ago is Medicaid waiver work. Medicaid waiver is a program that allows home and community-based services rather than being forced to go to a nursing home if you don't have the financial resources to pay for care. So make sure that when you're speaking to this elder law attorney, and a good one is going to go over these issues, but Medicaid waiver is a way of first accessing public resources while preserving financial resources, but just as important, getting care in a location that is preferable to you. Most people want that care in their home, and if they have a spouse or a good support system, Medicaid waiver works for a lot of clients. There are restrictions, but I've been doing a lot of waiver applications, which has been saving people the need to go to a nursing home. So I think that's a great program if you qualify. When I talk about doing the pre-planning when you're just diagnosed, the reason is I can't, as an ethical elder law attorney, have you sign documents you don't understand. So if we don't get those in place prior to your cognition declining to the point where you won't understand these documents, then we are stuck with a legal guardianship, which is costly and far less flexible than a well-drafted power of attorney. In my protective services practice, one of the things that has changed dramatically over the last 25 years is the type of financial exploitation that we see. And I should probably explain to those who don't know what protective services is. Protective services is a subunit of every area agency on aging in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So that means they usually, most, have specialized caseworkers who are dealing with the most at-risk elder adults in the community. To be under protective services jurisdiction, you have to be over the age of 60. There is protective services for those under 60, but it is not administered by the Area Agency on Aging. So I represent the protective services for our Area Agency on Aging. And what has changed very dramatically over the last 25 years is the financial exploitation. So protective will investigate self-neglect, caregiver neglect, financial exploitation, physical and emotional abuse. But the financial exploitation piece has changed dramatically with technology. It used to be, when I was a younger lawyer, that people would take a neighbor or a family member to the ATM and pull out a few $100s at a time, and that was the financial exploitation, or would have them write checks. Today, with technology, where people are on the internet, they go to chat rooms because they're lonely or they're not being supervised, or they somebody contacts them on their mobile phone, and they become vulnerable to this type of exploitation. It's very different than it used to be, and it's much worse, because it used to be they'd steal a couple hundred or even a couple thousand at a time. But today, with technology, what's happening is that people are being exploited, and they are sending wires to other countries for hundreds of thousands of dollars. And this money is gone. Once it's in another country, the FBI, the federal agencies have an almost impossible time getting it back. So one of the things that I want to say to you is, when you get that early diagnosis, you need to make sure you are supervising your loved one much more thoroughly than you did before. Because the time when this financial exploitation occurs is not when a person has gotten more impaired. It is right at the beginning of the dementing process. So these are people who you might meet at a convenience store, who are ordering a hoagie. They're going to the doctor. They're taking their medications. They're eating healthy. They're driving around. Some of them are even working. And yet somebody gets them on the telephone and convinces them to buy stock, or to give to a charity, or to a gentleman who is in the Pacific on a boat, who is helping out people at risk in faraway places. And they give away hundreds of thousands of dollars to these people, and they continue this over periods of months. And it is terrifying to me, and I see it far more frequently today than I have ever thought would happen. And the people who are being scammed are people who otherwise are almost fully functional, but there is just something at the very beginning of that dementing process that is allowing them to be manipulated. Once they become more demented, they don't have the ability to follow through with the financial exploitation. But at the beginning of the process, that's where you have to be most vigilant, because that's where the risk is highest. So I'm going to now stop. I hope I didn't overstay my 10-minute welcome. And I will, if anybody has questions about these issues that I've discussed or any others, we will have a period towards the end of the presentation where the panel can all discuss these issues.
Thank you, Attorney Slusky. Very good information, especially breaking it down into five points like that. Very good information. Your experience really shows. Thank you very much. As an Area Agency on Aging Director who handles a lot of those protective services cases, it's invaluable to at least have that initial legal review of where you're at to hopefully prevent some of those crisis situations that we see. So thank you very much. Our next panelist, so legal is one thing, but medical and the clinical side of handling dementia and Alzheimer's and other related issues. We have blessed to have Dr. Anita Chandra, who is from the Allegheny Health Network. Welcome, Dr. Chandra, and I'll allow you to give a brief introduction on your background and history, and go ahead and give us some tips and points from the medical perspective.
Great, thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here and share some things that I've seen and some tips. So as Matt said, I work in the hospital. I'm a geriatrician, so I see older adults, primarily who are admitted to the hospital for a variety of things. And oftentimes that includes dementia and complications from dementia. And a lot of times I see, people who are in the hospital for one reason and don't realize, their family doesn't realize that whatever they're there for is related to the dementia. So I'm having a lot of conversations with caregivers, oftentimes for the first time in the hospital. So like I said, I see older adults in the hospital. I do specialize in dementia. My personal interests are, in terms of dementia, are connecting with caregivers and connecting them with resources that can help. Because before even talking about any of the medical things, I just want to say the fact that all of you caregivers are on a symposium like this means you're doing a great job. This is not easy work. And I hope that you all have heard that many times before. You're doing a great job. None of this is easy. And I know, as I tell my patients and their families a lot, that dementia in general is more of a disease for loved ones than it is for the person who's affected. They may not realize that anything is wrong at all. And watching somebody who is close to you, who you know, change into somebody who's unfamiliar is really difficult. So I just want to make sure that's acknowledged before talking about any of the medical aspects of things. That said, I would say, just as that's been mentioned before, knowing what to expect in dementia early on, right after that initial diagnosis, is really probably the most helpful. I know a lot of times people get a diagnosis of dementia from, a family doctor, a primary care provider, who will do a great job doing the necessary diagnostic tests and giving that diagnosis. But then the conversation kind of stops after that diagnosis is given. Sometimes people think that, older adults just have dementia. That's just something that happens, and it's primarily related to thinking and memory. But as I'm sure many of us on this call know, that as the disease progresses, we do see a lot of changes, more with physical and functional abilities. And that's really what we're looking for, from the medical standpoint. When we're looking at staging and advancing, we're really looking at how much more help your loved one needs, with whether it's things like bills or medications or making meals. And eventually, as the disease progresses, we're looking at how much help they need with bathing and dressing. And are they falling more? Are they having difficulty eating? Sometimes people are not even aware that that is part of the disease progression until they're in the hospital. And at that time, it's easy to attribute those things to other medical problems. And I really try to bring it back to how dementia and Alzheimer's can be the umbrella over everything that's going on in the person's body. It's really the umbrella. So I can fix your kidney numbers, or I can fix the heart pumping out a certain amount of blood, but that umbrella is still there no matter where you're going. And in fact, the umbrella is just getting bigger and bigger. So that is the piece that really should play into all of the medical problems. So oftentimes people with dementia are seeing lots of different medical specialists, and as caregivers, you may not be discussing the dementia piece because it may seem like it's unrelated to the individual organs. But I think that's really important to remember, that anything that affects any organ in the body, whether it's a fall or an infection, even if it seems minor, that can make the dementia, that umbrella, get a little bit bigger. So even if it's a short hospital stay, or even an emergency room visit, all of those things can make that umbrella get bigger. And unfortunately, at this time, there's not much that we can do to make things smaller, but we can slow down the progression of that umbrella getting bigger over everything going on. And that's really my focus. And that's where I like to have discussions with family and patients surrounding things that can be changed, lifestyle changes. Once we have that dementia diagnosis, that doesn't get reversed, but there are certainly things that we can do that can slow down the progression. So how does interacting with your doctor play into that? One, so I'm a geriatrician. A lot of people see either neurology or geriatrics or just a family doctor to manage dementia. There really is no right place to be, but I can't speak for other specialties, but in geriatrics, we try to really look at everything, including things like medication, whether prescribed or over-the-counter medications. We also try to look at lifestyle and function. We know that there's a lot of evidence that physical activity and strength plays a big role in preventing dementia worsening, or even presenting in the first place if there's a family history or something like that. We try to promote physical independence. We look at things like, the support system. All of you on this call today, we try to involve people early on. We also try to make sure that there is a system in place in terms of powers of attorney, making sure that people are seeing the elder law team early in this diagnosis. We really try to, look at everything. So what can we do to try to slow that progression? Go to your doctor with a list of the medications that you're taking. And that includes supplements, vitamins, things that you might have seen on TV. All of those things do make a difference. Some are safe, some are not. Those kinds of things can make dementia seem worse than it is. If you see your doctor and you come up with a good plan, even things like if somebody has sleep apnea and is not using a CPAP machine, things that you may not even associate with dementia. If you're getting low oxygen to your brain, that's going to make your thinking and memory worse than it is. Sleep is a big thing that I talk about with my patients. I talk to a lot of older adults, and I talk to a lot of older adults who take a lot of medications for sleep that they see on TV. A lot of those medications can make someone mimic the symptoms of dementia. So just those little changes can make a big difference. Sleep hygiene, avoiding screens before bedtime, keeping your mind active. In this country, when people retire, it's very common to sort of lose your routine, lose that purpose of whatever you were doing that was keeping your mind active when you were working. So making sure that your loved one has a schedule, including sleep and activity and sort of a routine. Those are the things that we like to work with patients and families to try to keep their brain engaged as much as possible. I would say also just knowing that periods of confusion and hospitalization are common and expected as disease worsens. I think it's a hard concept to grasp that can just happen as part of the disease. We oftentimes look for a reason for this to happen, whether it is, looking for a urinary tract infection or looking for a stroke, kind of looking at other organs to blame, which is kind of how I see it. So it's very difficult when it's the brain that's affected. I like to talk to families about how if it's somebody's heart that has a problem that isn't beating the right way, the way that it's supposed to, we wouldn't tell our loved one, well, you just need to try to make your heart beat better. It's just the same with the brain. And it's really hard when it changes personality. So that patience and bringing that back to yourself, reminding yourself that your loved one isn't trying to not remember or isn't trying to not understand what you're explaining would be safer, to use their walker, or to take their medications. They just may not be able to retain that information, just like the heart can't make itself beat a different way. So I would say engage in conversations with your doctor about your concerns. Many of us, especially in geriatrics, I often send my patients lists of resources that could be helpful, including, the biggest one is the Alzheimer's Association, and finding other caregivers who are going through similar things, sharing tips. No dementia is the same. No Alzheimer's is the same. Progression can be different from person to person. And, like I said, everybody here is doing a great job just trying to learn about things, how you can help. And I think that's amazing. And as physicians, especially, we really all commend you. And it's amazing what you're all doing for your loved ones.
Thank you, Dr. Chandra. I'm impressed on how professionals in the network, whether medical or legal or caregiving, all say the same thing. We need to assist one another and support one another and reaffirm one another, because we're each dealing with different aspects, and those consumers really need our support to help overcome some of the challenges that these diseases and diagnoses have with them. So thank you very much. Our next panelist is going to talk about the caregiving. And like I said early in the opening for this panel, these are definitely the most challenging times I've ever seen in 25 years in trying to find proper caregiving, and caregivers themselves being able to be the best caregiver they can. So we are blessed to have Joanne Cordy-Grossi, who was past president of AARP Pennsylvania, as well as numerous other positions at the national and global level. So I'll let Joanne introduce and highlight her experience and talk a little bit about how those caregivers need to support themselves. So go ahead, Joanne.
Thank you, Matt. Good morning, everyone. And as Matt said, I'm Joanne Grossi. I'm the AARP Pennsylvania State President Emeritus. For 6 years prior to that, I was the president of AARP Pennsylvania. And as Matt said, I'm happy to have had a long experience in public health, including I was an appointee of President Obama as the regional director of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. I then, before that, served as Deputy Secretary of Health for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania in the administration of Governor Rendell. And before that, Matt mentioned globally, I did work at our foreign aid agency, the United States Agency for International Development, doing international health work in developing countries. So more than 30 years of public health service, and really devoting my life to the health and well-being of people in Pennsylvania and all over the world, really. But that's a professional side. On the personal side, I have been a caregiver for my now 93-year-old father for 10 years. The first 8 years were while he was still living independently at home. I would go over and cook his meals and wash his clothes and clean his house. And I did that for 8 years until he could no longer live independently. And now for the last 2, he's been living with me. That has been an absolute struggle, both mentally and physically. And so, I am going to spend a few minutes talking about kind of the mental health aspect of being a caregiver and some tools that I have found help me and hopefully will help you, and other research, that we've seen from AARP that might help you. And so first, I just want to give you a couple of statistics. Actually, AARP did put out a report this year entitled A Look at Caregivers' Mental Health. You can find it on our website, aarp.org/caregiving. And the report found that more than half of caregivers find that caregiving makes it hard to take care of their own mental health. And according to the same report, nearly 4 in 10 caregivers say they never or rarely relax, and 41% report being lonely. And in addition, half of caregivers had suicidal ideation, especially during the pandemic, and 14% say they have frequent mental health distress. So if you're a caregiver, I am sure none of those statistics were surprising to you. It wasn't surprising to me. I have lived a lot of those statistics myself. But that's the statistics. I want to try to give you some tools that I think are helpful, that can help you deal with your mental health. So first and foremost, ask for help. If you listened in on that other panel before, you heard about how caregivers were dealing with different ways of family, friends, different teams. And I think that's absolutely true. That's true from my experience too. I think you just have to ask for help. You can't be shy about this. You're going to have to ask friends, family members, neighbors, if they can just help you take care of a loved one, even just for a few hours, so you can take a walk or go to a movie, go grab a coffee at Starbucks, just something, even if it's not all day. Can somebody help you, for a few hours and give you a break? Secondly, take people up on their offer when they ask you to help. Don't be a martyr. That's one of the things I did in the beginnings. People would ask me, how about if I take your dad for a couple of hours? And I would be like, no, I can deal with this myself. But, I learned very quickly that no, take people up on their offer. And when people ask me, they're like, how about sometime I take your dad to lunch or, so you can go do something? I say, only say that if you really mean it, because I'm going to take you up on that offer. And then I do. And so I really want to tell you, don't be shy about this. Don't be a martyr. Take people up on their offer when they ask for it. I think this came up in the last panel as well. So some of these ideas I'm sure you've heard of, but, look into respite care. If you don't have an informal network, I'm lucky enough in my own personal situation that I do have a sibling who lives pretty close by, as well as a niece. And so, we have managed kind of a team approach to, giving me some breaks. They help me, they take him a couple of days, a couple of hours each week. But if you don't have that, friends or family who can help you, look into respite care. There is the National Respite Locator, and they can help you with figuring out how do you get, kind of real respite care, including adult daycare. So there really are these kind of resources out there for you. And Matt can tell you a lot more about that, with the area agencies on aging. So, take people, see if you can get some respite care, and if that, will work for you if you need it. Now, of course, respite care isn't free, and adult care isn't free. But so I understand some people might have some financial challenges with that. But again, those resources are available if you can at least take advantage of them every now and then. Some other ways I've personally found that helps me cope is, for example, I'll set up phone dates with friends. So I know the times of the day when my dad's either asleep or, I fed him. And so I've got a couple hours. And so I'll literally schedule phone dates with friends. And just talking to a friend for an hour, just really makes, the day better. And I get a break mentally, and I'm thinking about something else, and I'm hearing about somebody else's life and what's going on with someone else. So, I absolutely schedule phone dates with friends, even if I can't physically see them, it's something to at least be with them on the phone. I've also, asked friends to come over. I warn him in advance that he might interrupt us, or he might be demanding, or he might do something. But how about coming over and spending an hour or two over here, and, I'll give him dinner or coffee or something. And so, I invite friends over, and that's, again, just a break to be with other people, even if it's in my own home. And then some of the other things I've done that I really find helpful are, things that I can do online, just like we're doing right now today. I belong to a couple of museums. I take a course at the community college that's online. I belong to some associations. For example, I belong to the American Italy Society, so I'll listen to some lectures in Italian. Or my former place where I used to work, the Foreign Aid Agency, we have an alumni association. We just had a lecture, last night that I listened in on, or a museum I belong to, they'll have a lecture. So I've done a lot online, that really helps me out to at least escape mentally for an hour by taking a course, listening to a lecture, just being somewhere else. That's really helped me a lot. But then there's, not just the kind of intellectual side, there's the physical side. I really got to remember to move. Daily exercise is so important for you as a caregiver. You can't just be stuck at home, and there's so many physical challenges to taking care of someone. I know that. I'm about to turn 65, so here I am myself, a senior citizen about to go on Medicare, and I'm taking care of someone else, and that is very physical, in addition to emotionally. And so I make sure I get exercises, either I take lots of walks, and that's the other thing I want to encourage. Even if you can only get outside for 15 minutes and take a 15-minute walk, it just makes such a difference to get that air, to get that exercise, really helps you mentally. Just leaving the house for a few minutes really makes a difference in your well-being. And in fact, that same report I was telling you about earlier, our AARP report showed that more than half of caregivers surveyed said that exercising really helped them cope with the stress. And so I can't stress enough that you've got to, move and take care of yourself. And again, we heard about this a lot in the last panel, and the doctor mentioned it as well, but you have to take care of yourself, get a good night's sleep, make sure you eat healthy foods, make sure you're drinking lots of water, make sure you get your, immunizations and screenings from your doctor, make sure you're still doing that for yourself. And then a couple of other things, try meditation. There's certainly lots of apps online. And again, even at AARP, we have some exercise classes online, yoga classes online. Just try to meditate and relax when you can. And then kind of a last couple of points is, talk to your doctor as well. I mean, a lot of people will say they miss their own appointments, to take care of themselves. I never do. I make sure I still have my wellness appointments all the time, my mammograms, every other kind of appointment I need to have. And my doctor knows I'm a caregiver, and we've had very honest discussions about do I need anything medically? I have not to date, but I think some people might, and it's important to just have your doctor know where you are too in this journey, and make sure that you're getting taken care of the way you need. And then finally, and I think this is a really important one, which is why I saved it for last, I just think it's important to be honest in your discussion with others. People ask me, how's it going? And I'll say, it's really difficult. It's really a burden. I think it's so important, at least for me, to be able to express that this is really hard, and that I lose my patience sometimes, and that it's hard to just be concentrating on somebody else 24 hours a day, and how this isn't how I envisioned my retirement, taking care of someone else. And I just think for me, emotionally and mentally, it makes such a difference that I'm honest with people about where I am in this journey, and that people know that yes, it's a blessing to still have my dad around, but it's also a burden. And I just think it's important to be honest about that. And for me, that actually helps my mental health to be honest about that. And finally, being honest with yourself too, because, for example, I realized early on when he was living here that I can't do more than 3 straight days without him. By day 4, somebody has to give me a break. And so that will be different for other people, but I think it's important to really be honest with yourself too about what you need. And again, as I kind of said in the beginning, and just, talk to people about that, ask for the help. I've said to my sibling, I cannot do more than 3 straight days with him. You must come by day 4 and give me a break. Same thing to my niece. And so we've set that up, but I had to really be honest with myself and be honest with them and have that discussion. And so I would, end with that. Make sure you're having honest conversations. That's the way for me, at least, that I've been able to maintain my mental health as best as I could. So I'll leave it there. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Joanne. Yes, that honesty is for everyone across the board, right? So we all have to be honest that there's no simple solution here. There are very difficult and challenging things to navigate to provide supports for caregivers, for those diagnosed with dementias, for everyone involved in the situation. Sometimes it just takes continuous lifelong learning, like we heard in the earlier discussion. Many people care for older adults feel alone and overwhelmed in their caregiving journey, and that leads to their own emotional and physical health and financial concerns. Research shows that 1 in 4 family caregivers say it's difficult to afford services for their loved ones to help them with their care. And one of the key support things, and I have to let you know that we had a panelist that was supposed to be here, so we have a couple fill-ins here, but Brenda Apple will help us to understand the caregiver support program that exists in Pennsylvania. It's both state and federal, and I'll have Brenda help out, and I'll jump in too. We, as our area agency on aging, run the caregiver support program up in here in Erie County, and it's a real lifesaver for a lot of caregiving situations. So Brenda, go ahead and discuss caregiver support.
All right. Yeah, thank you. Like Matt said, unfortunately, our next presenter had a family emergency and was unable to be here today. She is the director of the Perry County Area Agency on Aging and was going to talk about the caregiver support program. So I'm going to fill in a little bit. Actually, prior to becoming the project manager here at P4A, I worked at an area agency on aging in Columbia, Montour counties for 17 years. And one of the programs that I actually care managed back when I first started was the caregiver support program. So it has evolved over the years, and it's actually become a stronger, better program. So that's why we want to highlight this program today. So caregiver support program, CSP, we often use that acronym for this program. It provides resources and assistance to individuals who assume the primary caregiving role for provision of care to encourage healthy, ongoing relationships with their care receiver. The program aims to alleviate stresses associated with caregiving by focusing on the well-being of the caregiver. Caregiver support program. So this particular program through the Area Agency on Aging focuses on the caregiver, not the care receiver, which there's obviously a piece for that, but we like to focus on the caregiver for this particular program. Provides access to respite care, addressing the need for informal and formal supports like we've been talking about throughout this program, and providing financial reimbursement for out-of-pocket expenses associated with caregiving related services. To qualify for the program, there is no financial eligibility requirement for the program. However, the amount of reimbursement is based on the total gross income and household size of the care receiver. So that's where our care receiver comes into play. Services that are available: care management, benefits counseling, caregiver education and training. Those are the parts that there is no financial eligibility. Those are available to you as the caregiver. But then reimbursement for ongoing expenses such as respite care, consumable supplies that can become very expensive, such as nutritional supplements, incontinence supplies, things like that. And then supportive services in the home modifications that might be needed, and assistive devices. And each person will qualify based on the income of the care receiver, and that's how the AAA will decide what kind of reimbursement you are allowed. In order to get additional information about the CSP program, you want to contact your local area agency on aging. The 52 AAAs manage this program throughout the state, so they would be the one that could do an intake, explain the program, explain once they gathered the income information, be able to tell you what kind of reimbursement you would be allowed. Also, in addition to CSP, your local area agency on aging has a wealth of resources available to you as the caregiver and for your care receiver. Services such as personal care assistance, adult day services, in-home meals, adult community centers, and even if you need information, maybe it's a program that they don't particularly host at their agency, they can provide you with the information or referral to other programs and services out there that can also assist you, even if they don't provide the actual services in their local aging office. We become a wealth of knowledge over all the 52 AAAs over many different areas. And I think we pride ourselves on saying, if we don't know the answer, we'll find out and help you, direct you in the right location to get the services that you need. So that was just a quick overview of the CSP program. Matt, if you want to join, add anything else or jump in.
Yep. Thank you, Brenda. caregiver support is, like Brenda said, is one of the many things that area agencies on aging help do. Funded through, the Pennsylvania Lottery is dedicated to benefit older Pennsylvanians, and the Department of Aging in Pennsylvania that oversees a lot of the area agency on aging in Pennsylvania is a great wealth of information. There's a benefits and rights book for older Pennsylvanians that I encourage all of you on the call to get a copy of, or go online to aging.pa.gov to look up that benefits and rights booklet. It has contact information for everything we discussed here on the panel: legal, medical, those financial support things, as well as the caregiver support program as reimbursements. So please encourage to contact your local AAA or go online, let your fingers do the walking to get that information. So thank you, Brenda. I'd like to bring back all of our panelists now as we start to dive a little deeper into each one of these areas, and any one of our panelists can chime in as we join this discussion, because whether it's legal or whether it's medical or whether it's caregiving or whether it's the support systems that are out there and available, we all have need for finding out how to access these programs. So I'll throw out the first question there, which is something that Attorney Slusky's talked about and touched upon, but that's when it all falls apart. In the middle of the night on Christmas Eve, the area agencies as an aging are older adult protective services. I like to say what local counties do for children and youth, we do for those that are age 60 and better. We don't use 60 and older, we use 60 and better, because that can happen at any given time. So Attorney Slusky, what are those tools, the legal ramifications of those crisis responses? I know guardianships are one of the things that eventually may have to happen, but there's also some things before you get to that guardianship level that we want to make sure people know legally how they can
and you're
handle
right.
crisis.
First, people have to understand is what we're talking about. So if you have a loved one who is better than 60 and you want to address an emergent situation, you've got a couple of different resources. Yes, you can call the 800 number that every older adult protective services agency / area agency on agency has, and they will connect you with whoever the on-call provider is. Understand each county does that differently. In Montgomery County, where I represent the area agency on aging, we use a private, not-for-profit agency that actually also provides psychiatric services. They're our on-call provider. So they actually will handle calls after hours for our county, and then a caseworker will get, if it will then go to our intake people in the morning after 8 o'clock, and then potentially, depending upon the nature of the call, be assigned to a caseworker to investigate the call. But that isn't the only option you have. First, if you have someone who's, maybe in a dangerous situation, physically dangerous, then you always have the local police. They can always file, and it's going to depend on the county as to how it's handled, but you can always get the local police to assist in filing for what's called a 302. A 302 is an involuntary psychiatric commitment, so that if an older adult is exhibiting what could be considered psychiatric or psychotic symptoms, because oftentimes, which is a frustration to me as a lawyer, sometimes the psych facilities will say, well, the first axis here is dementia, so we're not going to handle it. But in reality, many times when an older adult is having an emotional or cognitive difficulty, the symptoms are in fact psychiatric symptoms. They might be psychotic, they may be schizophrenic in their behavior. So oftentimes the police can help manage it, and they often have resources. Obviously, the level of training is going to be different. Some townships, boroughs, etc., are much more intense in their training of the police and how to handle older adults. Some are less so. Some in the more rural areas, you might not even have a local police department. You might be calling the state police, who, again, could be either very well trained or less than well trained. So if there's an emergent situation, having the 800 number that's in the chat section is a great thing. Each county will also have their own 800 number, which you can find on their website. But the police can help. Now, Matt mentioned the use of a legal guardianship. That is something that we will typically use in an emergency, but that's not something you're going to be able to use on a Wednesday evening or on a weekend, because that requires a judge. And while technically there are on-call judges in most counties, in practicality, you're going to have to get a lawyer to file the guardianship within the next few days. Now, a guardianship is a legal proceeding where essentially you have to prove two things. One is you have to show that the individual we're speaking about is incapacitated under Pennsylvania law, which means they lack the capacity to take in information and make safe decisions from the information. Now, understand that the law, and hopefully your lawyer and judges, want you to use the least restrictive alternative that's available. We don't always want to be jumping to guardianships, because there might be other alternatives that may be less restrictive and less invasive of the individual's rights. So the judges want that, and because the judges want it, that's what I want, because I have to deal with these judges. So a guardianship is a tool, but if, for instance, you have a person, one of the things that the experts here that are better than I am will tell you is that sometimes a person who has cognitive impairment can be redirected. And sometimes that redirection is the first line of defense. Yes, if you have a person who is going to the bank and taking out vast amounts of money and giving them to strangers, yeah, you need to stop that. And pretty much the only way you're going to stop that is with a guardianship. But in your average emergent situation, even calling the EMTs, I have found, and maybe the experiences of the other panelists are different, but in my experience, simply seeing a uniform, even for a person who's cognitively impaired, that kind of brings them back, and their behaviors are somewhat more compliant, because people of a certain age show, frankly, more respect for the military, for the police, for physicians. Lawyers, not so much, but whatever. We don't need the respect. We just got to do our jobs. So I find that a good police officer can be invaluable because they are often trained in how to de-escalate behavioral issues. I hope I didn't over answer that question, Matt.
No, I think it needed to be said. The other thing I want to bring in Dr. Chandra about, one of the things when you mentioned least restrictive, in a lot of cases that cognition may be a temporary thing, and there may be health or clinical aspects that can help. We always say in our older adult protective services, yeah, we call EMTs so that they can come out and make sure that there isn't an acute need for that individual. So Dr. Chandra, do you want to talk about maybe UTIs or anything that might cause some of those acute needs in crisis situations?
Exactly. That's a very common issue in the hospital that we see every day. So delirium is something that I'm sure many of us have seen in the people we know who have dementia. It's an acute confusion state. So we expect that to get better. When we're deciding about decision making in the hospital, we're looking at that on a day by day, even hour by hour basis. So we have a whole protocol for how to decide. We really don't want to take away an individual's ability and right to make decisions for themselves and their body. So we have conversations with patients about, can you explain your decision? Can you tell me back what's going on or what people are concerned about? And if they're able to give me a good explanation that they heard me, they know what's going on with their body, and they can tell me what the risks are, people are allowed to make their own decisions. We really do not like to jump to, permanently having somebody else make a decision for them. We want to honor and respect the wishes of the people that we're caring for. So maybe in that moment, they may not be able to make a safe decision for themselves. And that's something that we reassess on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you very much. I know, like I said, least restrictive alternatives are there's a pecking order of you want to make sure that you address this, or the simplest solutions. One of those comes back to, and I'll bring Joanne in, for the caregiver itself. So again, if poor hygiene wasn't maintained by the caregiver or the individual, that can lead to certain infections that would cause some of these delirium. So, Joanne, help me explain how caregivers can be fully aware of some of their roles and maybe some support things that you're aware of that can help the caregivers to make sure that they do the best caregiving they can.
Yeah, well, I hope, I alluded to that earlier in my talk, but, I mean, certainly, and it's in the chat already so people can see it, but, the Alzheimer's Association has so many tools, and I'm really proud of what we have at AARP. If you go to aarp.org/caregiving, you're going to see so many resources for you, everything from legal to financial to mental health, specific to veterans. You heard in that earlier panel today about how Amy is in charge of this Facebook support group. We have support groups for people. There are so many resources now online. And I mean, there are a lot of downsides to the pandemic, but the upside to the pandemic is so many things that we have now available to us online, not just some of those resources I just talked about, but things I mentioned earlier, that you can actually take exercise classes online at AARP. We have somebody who does every Monday, Moving with Millie, that you can just do an exercise class online, yoga classes online, all those things I talked about, that are helping me personally, that I listen to lectures online, that I take a course from the community college online. There's so many things online that help your mental health. And, I'll just say it again, even though this is, what we were just talking about now, or some of the resources you can find online or do from home. I cannot stress enough that you've just got to get out of the house. You just have to get out of the house. I mentioned, I know there are times when my dad's napping and I just go out and take a 15-minute walk or run to the Starbucks for half an hour. And I just can't stress enough that to me, the best self-help tool and the best mental health tool is just getting some alone time and getting some fresh air and getting away from it and thinking about something else. So the good news is, a little long and I'm being a little redundant, but I think the good news is now there's so many resources online, that can help you, and so many organizations willing to help, including yours, Matt. Obviously, when my dad first moved in with me, I actually contacted my Montgomery County Area Agency on Aging, and that's as someone who's worked at AARP, right? I still contacted my AAA and made sure I spoke to, staff there and found out what are all the resources my dad qualified for or didn't qualify for, frankly, because of his financial situation, or what advice they had. But again, the AAAs are such a great resource too that I think people don't often take advantage of. So, I mean, the good news is there are a lot of, organizations out there to help you, and people, again, I know I'm being redundant, but ask for help. You've got to ask for help. You can't do this alone. We talked about that in the earlier session. This is a team approach to taking care of someone with, dementia. So ask for help.
Exactly. And like you aptly said, one of your primary local resources can be your area agency on aging. Again, we've been supported since the 1970s and through the Older Americans Act nationally. So there's a lot of experience and support there, and reach out and ask. And all of the area agencies on aging practice person-centered counseling, which is really to listen to what the situation is. A lot of times we'll get people call our intake lines and they say, I need this. And it's very one focused thing. But realize that half of the staff at the area agencies on aging are care managers who are experienced social workers, trained and educated on a whole laundry list of different programs and supports available to address all of these needs. We're not legal experts. We'll go to the legal experts. We're not doctors and physicians, so we'll go to them. And we're not day-to-day caregivers, so to speak, but we can put you in touch with home health agencies and all those local entities and resources that are available. So that's the biggest part that I want to make sure when you ask for help and support that get a trained social worker to help you navigate all the different things you need, not just, oh, I want a home delivered meal, or not just one thing. With that, one of the key things that most callers ask about, and it's one of the questions in our chat, have to do with their financial resources and their assets. Older adults have saved their entire life for their retirement, and they've developed assets, and they don't want those assets just to go away. So I'll go back to Attorney Slusky to start with. How does one protect those assets that older adults have had, especially when the cost of care may drain that nest egg really quick?
And the answer, like many in the legal field, is it depends. What you need here is you have to look at the situation. Everything is about the facts. Somebody had posted earlier a question about whether you can use a trust to protect assets. And I don't know if my attempted answer to put in the chat registered, but the simple answer is yes, a trust can be a tool, but there's a lot of things that need to be in place fact-wise for a trust to be the right tool. And when somebody says what steps to secure their assets, well, it's really going to depend on who they are and their asset situation. Medicaid is the single largest payer for long-term care services in the United States. Honestly, when the program was designed, I don't think that was the intention, but it has become what it is. In other words, 60+% of the people who are sitting in long-term beds in nursing homes today are being paid for by Medicaid. So whenever we talk about asset preservation, what we're really talking about is Medicaid eligibility, because the only resource most people have, there are a few people out there who have long-term care insurance that may help, but frankly, the incidence of purchases of long-term care insurance are down dramatically. I mean, when I started practicing 30 years ago, long-term care insurance was just becoming a product, and it exploded into the late 90s and early 2000s. And since then, people don't buy it anymore because it's horribly expensive, much more restrictive, and there's very few companies that actually offer conventional long-term care policies in Pennsylvania anymore. So, the main tool that people have is either asset protection planning with lawyers, or having a long-term care policy, or in some cases, if someone is a veteran, and there are fewer and fewer veterans who would qualify, there is some assistance through the Veterans Administration under the Aid and Attendance Program. But for my client base, that is not a huge source of assistance, but for some people, it can be helpful. Medicaid is a program that will pay for long-term care if a person clinically needs the level of care that a nursing home would provide. Now, many people misunderstand this to be a much more serious, much more serious requirement than it is. In other words, while many people in a nursing home are very debilitated, to be qualified as clinically eligible for Medicaid, you need assistance. You don't need to be bedbound. So, for instance, if a person has a diagnosis of mild to moderate cognitive impairment, that's going to qualify them because they cannot live independently without some level of supervision. And even though they can take a bath or dress with cueing and direction, they couldn't do it independently. So they would qualify as nursing facility clinically eligible, which is the funny legal term they use to say you need the level of care that a person in a nursing home would typically need. So when you're looking at Medicaid, and I discussed earlier when I started today, we talked about the waiver program. So that clinical requirement is the same whether you're seeking services in a nursing home or whether you're seeking services in the community. Can you protect assets? Unequivocally. Are there better situations where you can protect more? Absolutely. For instance, when you're a single individual, you do not have a spouse, then there are less available ways of protecting resources. There are tools that we can use which are more aggressive to try to protect, but understand those tools are going to be less effective than if I have a spouse that I'm protecting money for, because what we're trying to do there is say, look, this spouse needs to live themselves and they are not in need of nursing care. And therefore, if we make them destitute, we've just created a second problem. So there are spousal impoverishment rules that we can use in the matter of if a spouse goes into a nursing home or needs waiver services in the home. And those are the tools that we will typically, the clients will get most benefit from. Now, there are also other circumstances. For instance, if you have someone in your life that is either disabled under federal law, maybe a developmentally disabled child, a delayed child that you've had in your home and you've been caring for, or even a grandchild or somebody you know. There are several tools that the federal and state law allows you to use to preserve resources for their care. So I have a fair percentage of clients where there is a disabled individual within their sphere of family, friends, influence, whatever. So that's a tool we use. But simply stated, without trying to go into gory detail, because every client's case is going to be very fact specific, there are tools that both the federal law and the state law give us to protect resources. And while there are published amounts that can be protected, a good elder law attorney can supercharge those amounts and actually protect a lot more in financial value than the stated amounts. One thing that is very important for people to understand, I believe that everybody on today's conference is a resident or theoretically a resident of Pennsylvania. We're talking about Pennsylvania law. Understand that there is federal Medicaid law and then there's individual state law. Pennsylvania has certain things that it provides or allows that are more generous than the federal law. Other states might provide less generous than Pennsylvania or more generous than Pennsylvania in the area of Medicaid or asset protection planning. So what I speak about is solely restricted to my experience and our regulations in Pennsylvania, which again are in some areas more generous than the federal law, but there are differences in Pennsylvania, which is something that I've been it's always gotten my dander up, is that in Pennsylvania, we do not subsidize assisted living. Whereas in New Jersey, there is a certain amount, I don't think it's unlimited, but there is a certain amount of beds that are available to be paid for by Medicaid in New Jersey for assisted living. We subsidize only nursing care, which I've always had a cognitive dissonance with, because it would save the state tremendous amounts of money, since there are many people who could survive happily in an assisted living, but are forced into nursing for financial reasons. I don't mean to get on my soapbox. It's a frustration, but I was highlighting that each state has differences. We have certain protections, though, that New Jersey doesn't. I have had clients move from New Jersey to Pennsylvania to take advantage of those protections. So again, it's a very client fact specific answer, but there are many tools that elder law attorneys will use so that we can protect assets for the healthy spouse, so they are not destitute and they can live a reasonable quality of life.
One quick follow-up on that was in the chat was Q&A was there's a financial power of attorney. Can you get one that doesn't go into effect until a diagnosis of dementia by a healthcare provider? And then your answer then will segue into Dr. Chandra to talk about some of these diagnostic tools that exist.
Okay, so the answer is yes, but why would you want that? As an attorney who does this area of law, the idea of a springing power of attorney upsets me. So this is what you're talking about. It is a power of attorney that has a condition before your agent can use it. And what I do, I pose the question to the audience, to the other panelists, why would anybody want a power of attorney that does not go into effect until a diagnosis of dementia? Does anybody want to answer that, or should I answer it? Come on. Tell me what you think. Why would anybody want that roadblock in front of the person they're naming? Maybe they don't have 100% confidence in who they named. Again, why would you name a person that you feel the need to have a roadblock? This is your advocate. This is your trusted individual with the intention that when you can no longer manage your stuff, whether that stuff is financial or medical, this is the person you've named because you think that they're going to do a good job, hopefully. Why would you want to put a roadblock in front of them? So what I say to my clients is, I will do whatever you want. But first, I'm going to tell you that I think you're wrong if you put a springing provision in a power of attorney that only allows them under certain circumstances, because you all know this. When you're using a power of attorney to help someone and you've got this roadblock that you need to satisfy, you are delaying your ability to help them, or they're delaying your ability to help them. But just as important, and not so much in the medical arena, doctors, hospitals, healthcare, they don't want roadblocks. They're willing to look around things and try to find a solution. You're not going to have problems on the medical side, but on the financial side, if you put in a condition like this that says diagnosis of dementia, each financial institution is going to have a different requirement as to what satisfies that. So you're going to have your mom who's going to have bank accounts at 6 different places. By the way, fix that before it becomes a problem. And each bank or financial institution is going to have a different requirement as to what satisfies that provision. So understand that when you put something in there like that, you are effectively tying the hands of the person that you have asked to be your advocate. So I am very much against springing provisions. I think they're very impractical, and it begs the question: if you don't trust the person enough to get access to your money when you're still cognitively intact, what makes you think they're going to become more trustworthy when you're not cognitively intact? I'll stop there.
And then let's segue to Dr. Chandra, because what are the specific diagnosis of dementia that doctors have at their disposal? And I know those are changing on a constant basis as we learn more about the neurological side of things. So, Dr. Chandra, what makes a doctor at dementia diagnosis, and what goes into that?
I definitely want to answer your question. I just want to also touch on the power of attorney piece that I see in the hospital. There seems to be a lot of confusion with, what exactly it means to have a power of attorney. A lot of families are under the impression, when I like I said, I always ask about powers of attorney, and people have said, well, I don't have one because I can make my own medical decisions. So there's a lot of confusion, and a lot of people think that once you have a power of attorney document in place, you're no longer in charge of your own finances or medical decisions. And I just want to, touch on that to clarify, if I'm correct, that is not the case. And I think that may have been why that question was asked. So.
You make an excellent point, doctor. That's exactly what some people think. They ask me, well, if I give my son this ability, am I no longer in charge? And one thing that is very clear, and sadly, in some cases, because the individual is still able to make decisions, even if they're impaired. In other words, people can still revoke a power of attorney until a judge says they lack the capacity to do so. So it's a delicate balance.
Right. So in terms of, sorry, Matt, were you talking?
No, I was going to say, go ahead with diagnostic, because that's not an exact science sometimes.
Right. Very much not an exact science. And I know that, everybody knows there's different types of dementia, and you can go into lots of different subtypes and treatments. And to be honest, from the medical perspective, for us, the subtype is not as important. The type of dementia is not as important. Typically, especially among older adults, when you're diagnosed with dementia, it's usually a mix of different types of dementia. You may have heard of course, everybody knows Alzheimer's is the most common. And then there's different types of dementia like vascular dementia, frontotemporal dementia. And I'm certainly not going to go into the specifics of those. But truthfully, we don't always know the type. And in terms of progression of disease and what you might see in management, it doesn't really make a huge difference. There are, of course, nuances with certain types of dementia and how we treat them and medications to avoid. But that, I would say, I wouldn't focus so much on the type just because there's so much overlap. In terms of diagnosis, so you don't have to be a neurologist. You don't have to see a neurologist to diagnose dementia. If there are any concerns about thinking, memory, difficulty caring for oneself, including things like losing money in scams, or having trouble, even just weight loss. If you're noticing that somebody that you know who's older, who lives alone and isn't monitored, they're losing weight, are they getting meals? We do a lot of digging into history. So yes, doctors will usually use one of the screening tools like the Montreal Cognitive Assessment or mini mental status examination. Those are all really just screening tools to give us an idea of how somebody is thinking in that moment. We would never make a diagnosis of dementia just based on asking a bunch of questions. There's a lot that goes into that. Even like I said earlier, medications can make those things worse, or just the circumstance in which you're answering those questions. That is an isolated thing that we look at in the bigger picture of everything else that's going on. So in order to diagnose dementia, we really, really need to know how somebody has been functioning and living in their community, what has changed, the time frame that has changed. I typically, when I see patients and their families who are concerned about dementia, I don't usually make that diagnosis the first time I meet someone. Because like I said, and I don't think I even mentioned earlier, something as common as depression may mimic symptoms of dementia. So we try our best to optimize the other things that look like dementia, or what we call pseudo-dementia, like making sure mood disorders are treated, or making sure we've optimized medications, and anything else that we can try to see if that score on that test gets better, or if that functioning in everyday life gets better before putting that label on somebody, because as we know, that has a lot of implications. So there's a lot that goes into diagnosis. And you'd be surprised to know that doesn't always mean, you don't really always need brain imaging to diagnose dementia. We don't typically see the findings of dementia on a CT scan or an MRI. Usually if we're doing those, we're looking to rule something else out, because a lot of times dementia is a diagnosis when we've ruled out everything else, because it's a big deal to give somebody a dementia diagnosis. So there's a lot that goes into it, and maybe a lot of back and forth and a few meetings with your geriatrician or neurologist or whoever, your primary care doctor, whoever may be diagnosing and treating the dementia. There isn't just one particular piece, but it is important to have those discussions and bring up any concerns early, because the earlier we know somebody's baseline, the easier it is to see changes over time and know what is concerning and what may not be concerning for that person.
Excellent, thank you. And you, I'm always amazed the longer you work in this field, the more interconnectedness you find out between legal, between medical, and in caregiving. Much like medical gets you to have a treatment plan to try and overcome the diagnosis or the symptoms. In caregiving, we have what's called a care plan. So you want to create a plan, as we said, forewarned is forearmed, and you want to prepare, and you want to develop a good care plan. And key to that care plan is the caregiver itself. And as we heard in the earlier panel, is dealing with the stress of caregiving, because it's complicated work every single day, minute, and hour to be able to provide the care that a person needs. And that's why a care plan, much like a treatment system in the medical field, is needed for each individual. And I wanted to ask Joanne, part of that care plan is obviously stress and anxiety and other ways that caregivers can relieve that, and family members can relieve that stress and anxiety, which will cause impacts on their clinical, which will have a need for legal. So, Joanne, for the stress and anxiety relief things that are out there that you're aware of.
Well, and by the way, I'm living a caregiving moment right now because my father's wandered out. And so you might hear him, see him. So I want to apologize in advance. And this is my daily life that, I can't even be on an hour call without it being interrupted. And so there's an example of stress right there. So, unfortunately, I'm afraid I think I'm going to be redundant. I mean, I think I've talked about these already. I've talked about that for myself. It's all those things I already mentioned. It is just taking courses online, making dates with a friend, that I've been honest with my sibling and niece that somebody somebody's got to take them every fourth day for, 4 or 5 hours so I can have a real lunch with someone or go to a movie. Or tomorrow I'm actually going to get my hair done. Hey, what do you know? I'm actually going to get my hair cut, which hasn't happened in, 2 months now. Or get my car into the shop to get the oil change. I mean, it's amazing all the things you can't do, that you take for granted in your life beforehand because you're responsible for someone, 24 hours a day. And the exhaustion of that. So I'm unfortunately being redundant, but I've just found all these ways to incorporate into my life the 15-minute walk, the half hour at Starbucks, the phone date with a friend, the online course, and then at the end of the day, which is the most helpful, really just kind of insisting that other people help you. And we talked about money. Haven't needed respite care and and adult take care, but of course that is available. And for people on Medicaid, you can get help, as you know better than I do, Matt, on how you can get some of those respite care paid for even. But for people like my father with financial resources, you have to pay for that, and so that's another financial stress that we have to talk about. But if he really has to come to it, that you put somebody in adult take care for a day or respite care for a week or so, and you just have to do it because we talked about this. It was talked about in that earlier session, but there are times I find I just become so impatient now, so angry. Again, I think you have to be honest about what's happened to you yourself. I don't like when that happens to me. I know it's not his fault, but I think you'd have to be Mother Teresa to not, lose your patience sometimes or to get angry. And you have to be honest about that yourself. And so, again, you just have to figure out what works best for you, to help you manage your stress and mental health.
Thank you. It's so important.
Yes, ma'am. Sorry.
No problem. Thank you. I think that's so important. I want to thank all of our panelists with great insight on a lot of different topics. Realize, again, you're not alone if you're not only an individual with dementia or a caregiver for someone with that diagnosis. Please reach out to local supports, area agencies on aging, AARP, Alzheimer's Association, all the great supports that are there available. That's what we do, and that's what we are here to provide, those support services for everyone that's out there. Please reach out and ask for help, like Joan said, and accept help if you need help, especially for those individuals who don't have a support network. A lot of the discussion we had today talked about those people who do have family members and interact. And a lot of times there's people that don't have family members. They've either outlived them or they've burned those bridges for one reason or another. And those are the ones that really need all of our supports and the neediest of the needy, as our Older Americans Act says. So thank you again, all the panelists. I'd like to wrap it up at this time. Return it back over to Brenda to lead us to the next segue.
Thanks, Matt. I was having issues getting unmuted there, but I will turn it back over to Melanie at the Alzheimer's Association for some wrap-up comments.
Thank you so much, Brenda. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Melanie Smith. I'm the Director of Care and Support for the Alzheimer's Association Delaware Valley Chapter. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you so much to our amazing panelists and to our community partners. We hope that you learned much today and found this symposium helpful and, most importantly, supportive. Before we move to our closing remarks by Christina Franzel and Clay Jacobs from the Alzheimer's Association, who will extend their gratitude to all and provide a call to action, we wanted to also bookend our symposium by letting you know that resources and surveys will be sent out to all attendees after the program. And with that, I'll let Christina take it away.
Thank you so much, Melanie. You're going to hear a lot of continued kudos. What an amazing day today has been. I know I have learned a lot. It was wonderful to see so many familiar faces, so many dear friends to the Alzheimer's Association, but most importantly, to be with all of you. I am Christina Franzel, the Executive Director for the Delaware Valley Chapter of the Alzheimer's Association. So coming to you from southeastern Pennsylvania, right here in Philadelphia. We're so grateful to all of you for the time that you took to be with us today. And we hope that, as Melanie said, you found this to be a supportive environment and certainly found resources that will help you and your loved one live your best life as you navigate your journey with dementia. Hopefully you found all of the resources and insights you need, but if you need more, certainly we are here for you. I do want to express gratitude as well as what Melanie just shared for all of today's presentation partners. We would not be able to do this without the support of so many wonderful people. We thank Secretary Kavulik for your warm welcome this morning and for joining us. We're honored to have you here with us today. Thank you also to Rebecca May Cole, Executive Director for Pennsylvania Association of Area Agencies on Aging. We appreciate your time and all of the work you've done planning for today. And a very sincere thanks to Bill Johnston Walsh, State Director of AARP, and all of our friends at AARP. Thank you so much for being with us and helping to plan and bring this group of people together. This symposium is the result of a collaborative effort across our Commonwealth, and we have very strong partners in the community who are helping us not only with things like today's symposium, but also every day-to-day support service that they provide. And that truly strengthens our community and our community of support. I want to thank you all for being with us, all of our panel moderators and panelists, for sharing your expertise, your personal journeys, your vulnerability, your expertise, and your personal experiences and insights into how we can better navigate the disease. With all of your efforts, we are so proud to be able to be with this group today, and I know that it is going to mean better support for the more than 500,000 family members and friends who serve as caregivers in Pennsylvania. Please share this with a friend, share our resources with a family member who may be in a similar situation to you. Let them know they are not alone. We are here. This entire community of support is here, and that they are not experiencing emotional, physical, and financial strains all alone. We are here for them, and there are others in similar situations, and this community is here for support. So I would like to now turn this over to Clay Jacobs with the promised call to action that we have for all of you.
Thanks, Christina. And I'd echo all of the things that each of you has heard today, whether it's our panelists or speakers or all of you who've attended and taken time from what are busy days. And so much of what we talked about is some of the challenges and resources and others. You know, I think it's important that we end with an opportunity and something we can do. And, you know, some of the conversation today remind me of the quote from the recently passed Rosalind Carter, who passed away from complications related to Alzheimer's disease, but earlier in her life, she had a quote that there are only 4 kinds of people in the world: those that have been caregivers, those that are caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need them. There's power in that, right? And I hope from today and other experiences, you know you're not alone. And so much of what we talk to is influenced by the things around us. At the Alzheimer's Association, we are the leading voice for Alzheimer's and dementia advocacy. And our passionate volunteer advocates, some of whom I know are with us today, are the engine that drives that work. By channeling experiences and the challenges and the things you've lived through, sharing your story, you can help educate policymakers and others, raise awareness of the needs you have so that future people's journeys are a little bit easier. You know, a great example of this is in things like federal funding for research. And while that's important, we've seen a 7-fold increase in research funding. When we talk about treatment or access or diagnosis, it is advocates who raised their voice who led to those things since the passage of the National Alzheimer's Project Act. Because of advocates like you, scientists are able to work at a more rapid pace. But this isn't limited to research funding alone, and we have seen things like respite funding and caregiving resource and physician education and so much more driven by policy at state and federal levels. And you have a chance to be a part of that. So what we would ask before you wrap up today is to take action now. Take out your phone and text AIM Walk, perfectly timed in the chat, to 52886. And take the action and request to lend your voice to let your elected official know that their support is needed now more than ever in helping provide care and support and help all those throughout Pennsylvania. So as we mentioned earlier, there will be resources emailed tomorrow from the association and our partners, P4A, AARP, to all that attended. But we'd ask you to take action now. And as you leave, think about today's experience and share with at least one person. Because as we know, we may never know what they're going through, but knowing they're not going through it alone makes all the difference. So thank you for your time. Thank you for everything you do. We can't wait to see you soon, but have a great day.